Good morning, everyone. My name is Kirill. I will be your instructor for the next couple of days. This is the training on BPM Online system customization and administration. Please let me know if you can see, if you could see my screen and if you can hear me well. Okay, great. So I see that people can see my screen. Fantastic. So without further ado, let's go into our demo stand. So so today I've sent you all demo stands that we will be using to do some of the examples that I will be demoing in this training. If you did not receive it for some reason, please let me know. I'll try to issue you a new one right away. I will be using a version of Bpm'online that is installed on my local host, on my local computer. I will be using a version 7.12.1. I believe this is all the versions that I've requested to issue to all the participants. So the version is here, 7.12.1.924. That's the easiest way to find out what your version is. If something is a little bit different, as long as you're on 7.12.1, that's okay. Your last number might be a slightly different one. Okay. In the meantime, if you have any questions, feel free to send me a chat message. I will respond to it as soon as I get to the section that hopefully covers the question. If not, I'll try to address it somehow ad hoc. So, all right, well, let's see how it goes. So this training is designed for analysts. It's designed for maybe even early developers who are interested to know how to customize the system to do something that it wasn't designed to do out of the box. The functionality available with our system is built in such a way that we can build pretty much anything and everything we want. So you could use it as a sandbox where you design and develop your own sections and your own features and your own services and your own everything, your own functionality basically, or you can use the system to customize it to use the existing functionality provided by the sandbox. For example, marketing, we're not going to be talking much about marketing, how to define marketing campaigns and stuff like this. But what I will be showing you as part of this training is how to use business processes. It's going to be a significant component of our demonstration. I will be showing you how to design your own sections, how to create one-to-many relationships within the system, how to use permissions, how to update lookup fields, etc. And that will probably give you a very good outlook on how you can customize the system, how you can use it. And then if you need to adjust and design or configure your own components that is provided to you by the default installation, then you will have sufficient knowledge. You will have sufficient knowledge to update it. Okay, I see that some people are still trying to get in. Just a second. I'll try to address it right away. All right. In the beginning, when you first get the system, it's very important that we do a couple of the steps that are not required, but they're very significant in order for for some stuff to work correctly. For example, when we're logging on as the system administrator by using a supervisor username and password, our system really doesn't know the installation location, I guess, or the default time zone of our installation. The time zone is going to be derived from the platform on which it's installed, so that will derive basically from the cloud instance. So if you're, let's say, in the US, then you will have Eastern time zone. If you're in Australia, that would be, again, Australian time zone, etc. If we need to override our time zone or simply to adjust it, there are a couple of places that we can do it in. So first, and the easiest one, is on your profile. The profile is available in the top right corner. I've updated the picture from my profile. I'll show you later how to do it. But right here, when you click on your profile, and you enter it, there's going to be a time zone selection. You can choose any time zone you want. The trick is that you have to log out and log back in for changes to take effect. All these changes are client-side changes, meaning that everybody can have their own different time zones. This is the time zone that will be applicable just to you or just for you, nobody else. So if I have a user supervisor, for example, working in the Eastern time zone, I can have a couple of clients who are working, let's say, in the Central time zone, and we will have all different times in our schedule. The next thing that you want to do is you want to probably go to call center setup, and you want to make sure that you check this disable call center integration. This call center integration allows us to configure telephony services such as Asterisk to monitor the logs that are, monitor the activity of our telephone system, to add the logs to contact accounts or whoever else we're calling. All that information is available for reporting, excuse me, available for reporting out of the system. So since we do not have any of those integrations installed out of the box, then it's probably best that we go and disable it. Again, it's all done in the profile and the call center partner integration. Just make sure that this checkbox is checked. Once you save the setting, the system will will tell you to log out, log back in, and the changes will take effect. Like I said, this is going to be your personal time zone, and that's expected of every user to configure. The next time zone that the next configuration that we have available is going to be through this cogwheel. So this is the little element that we're going to be going to quite a lot. This is where we're going to be configuring and customizing pretty much anything and everything with the system. Click there. It will take us to the system designer. The location of the page that you're currently viewing is available here in the address bar, and you could see that it's currently system designer. When we go into contacts accounts, it will tell us that it's a contact or account section module or a view or something. So you'll be able to derive the name of the page that you're in once you look at the URL. When you're in the system designer, you want to go in a little bit down in the system settings under system setup. There is a system setting, and inside the system setting, I would like you to search for default time zone. In order to perform search, click on filters and folders, add filter, and just type in default time. You don't need to type in the full name, default time. And the default time zone is going to be the only result available in the search. Open that setting, and again, choose the default time zone for your installation. This setting will be used every time a user logs in for whom the local time zone is not available. So for example, if you have an installation, let's say somewhere on the cloud in Virginia, but you are, let's say, in the central time zone, then you have to set this central time zone for default value, and then every user will be using that time zone. If, on the other hand, you have traveling salesman who's going from place to place, crossing across multiple time zones, then they are expected to change their time zone in the profile every time they travel. That's simply how the system works. All right. Now that those couple of changes are done, let's see what else we can configure here. System setting is the section of the system that allows us to pretty much configure system environment. So it's not necessarily how you're going to be experiencing the system, but those are going to be the settings that are kicking in various stages of operation. Currently, the system settings are broken into logical components, and they're all on the left-hand side. There are also what's known groups or folders. For example, campaign section settings. We can go and take a look at how often we update the interval for the campaign, maximum number of parameter, transition days, etc., etc. You can go through all these. They're pretty much self-explanatory, and you can configure those things to make system perform one way or the other. The ones that we're going to be using, I will be pointing out throughout this training, so don't feel that you need to know them all by heart right away, but just know that system settings are all configured here in the system settings section, which is right here. Again, system settings section, that's the name for it. The most interesting and the ones that we're going to be using right away are going to be related to the password. So here's my password system setting, and you could see that password validity, terms of days, password complexity, another password complexity property, etc., is going to be used to configure authentication of a user when they're accessing the system, much like Active Directory controls it when the people are logging into a central Microsoft Active Directory. So for example, we can set our password to expire every 30 days, to include one special character, and to be no less than 10 characters. So that's kind of a setting that you can take in the system settings. For now, we're not going to be adjusting any of them, and I don't want to be bugged with the security on the password expiry every time we make some changes. So what I am going to do is I'm going to just basically show you that they exist. How to change them is pretty straightforward. You open it, and then you change the default value to whatever suits your needs. So for example, validity terms of days, if I want my password to expire every 30 days, I'll change this value to 30, and my password will expire every 30 days when the user changes it. All right, so this is our system setting. The next one that I want to show you, again, we're going to go to a cogwheel, and that's going to be another very important component. That's going to be the lookup section. The lookup section is also in the system setup, right here, right above the system setting. The lookup section allows us to configure all the possible values for the system that are available as a drop-down boxes. So for example, when you go into your leads and you go into your contacts, you could see that the contacts, for example, if we're going to go to a contact, you can see that the contact type might be an employee, a contractor, or a marketing, where's that? Type, employee, contact person, customer, supplier, etc. If we want to add something else here, we can simply add some values to what's called a lookup list. So let's go ahead and try to add that to a lookup list and see how it works. To do that, I'm going to go to my cogwheel again, find my lookup section, and I'm going to search for employee type. Now I could simply search for type, but I probably have quite a lot of types. Now if I don't want to be going through all these types and searching the one that I want, I can choose contact type. Usually the section name will help you identify which type you're looking for. So in my case, it's a contact type. I can find it right here at the bottom of my page. If I click on it, a new page with a bunch of values will show up. And if I want to add something new, so for example, I can do an auditor. I can close it. And when I come back to my contacts, the values are immediately available for me to select from. Employee, and there's my auditor. So it's very easy to configure all the lookups. We're going to be configuring quite a lot of lookups. So you will learn how to create your own, how to use them, how to filter them, etc. So don't be alarmed if you feel a little lost right now. Okay. What you will notice also about my system is that I have what's called a soft key. Soft key simply means that I don't have a lot of demo data available to me in the system, and I purposely select that option because when we're building something, I don't want you to see a bunch of other information that is not relevant to what we're going to be doing here, and it's a little bit easier to trace what we've done from start to finish, and that's why I chose soft key. When you're ordering your system from, you're getting a demo or trial, you're going to get a lot of demo data in the system, and that's simply designed so you can play around and see how some stuff works. In our case, that's probably not very relevant, so that's why I chose not to have this stuff. Okay. So the first thing that we're going to review today, let me tell you what we're going to be doing. So in the next 3 days, we're going to build our own functionality, or we're going to enhance the functionality of a standard Bpm'online. We're going to build an expense report, a typical expense report where some people can file, let's say, their expenses when they're traveling. We're going to use a permission model to allow access to one or the other person or group of employees to modify, view, read, etc. We will use design or wizard, basically page wizard, section wizard, to design the feel and look of this page, to configure some of the business rules, or otherwise known as the validation rules for when you're entering the data. We will be using case management to show the milestones that that particular expense report has to go through. So for example, it gets filed, then it gets on the approval section, then it goes approved, then it goes into a page status, etc., etc. So that's called case management. And then we're going to be using a lot of business processes. We're going to spend quite some time to look at how business processes work. I'm going to introduce you to every single element that we currently have available in the system so you understand how it works. We may not need to use it as it applies to our case of building an expense report, but at least you'll get an idea how it works. Also, we have a couple of other areas in the system that are a little bit more technical than probably we want to get involved at this point, and they have to do with integration with web services and building machine learning. At this point, it's maybe a little bit more technical, especially machine learning. We need to understand how we get the data out, how we train the model, etc. So we're going to skip that part. However, I am going to be doing a webinar, open webinar next week, how to build your own machine learning models to predict some values or to use scoring of particular fields. So if you're interested, feel free to sign up, and that's going to be next week, I believe Thursday. And the week after, we're going to do another webinar on how to use web services when we want to execute web services provided to us by other systems. For example, you could be calling Google Translate as an example, or getting exchange rates from Bank of, pick the country, from some bank, Bank of Canada, let's say, to get the exchange rates of various currencies. Now, again, those elements are going to be part of business processes, or they will use business processes as its underpinning, but we're not going to get into quite a lot of details today, just simply because there's a lot of other stuff that we need to cover. If we do have time, though, like, I'll be more than happy to show you how it works today. Not today, but as part of the program. All right. You all probably know that on the right-hand side, we're going to have some, we have this notification panel or user panel. So here on this notification area, we'll be seeing a bunch of notifications as we create something, as we trigger. So we're going to be paying a lot of attention to what's happening here. It's very important to us. And also notifications are going to be available here. We're not going to be talking much about the feed at all. We're not going to be updating it or doing anything with the feed. It's fairly straightforward stuff. And then at some point, I may need to configure an email to show you how we can send the email as part of our business processes. So I will quickly add an email, but I'm not going to be using this panel to receive an incoming messages. I'm simply configuring an email to send it, to send or create an outgoing message. So that's basically what we're going to do. Okay. Now let's go back into our system designer. And inside system designer, a couple of things. First, we have processes, process library and a process log. Those are related to business processes. We are not going to be touching it today. We're going to probably touch it tomorrow or the day after. Process log is simply that allows us to look at the execution of business processes. Now, the user and administration, so system user, portal user, roles, functional roles, object permissions, operation permission, and audit log has to do with creating users, modifying their access, and monitoring what they're accessing and what they're changing. So this section has to do with user administration. The next one is import and integration, data import, LDAP, Mandrill integration setup. That's here for legacy systems. We don't really use Mandrill anymore. So if you're just getting on Bpm'online, then it's probably not going to be important to you. Mailing log, web service integration setup, and website event tracking. That's web service integration setup is something that we're going to cover probably in the last day. And website event tracking, that has to do with the marketing campaigns. When we are tracking with the use of our internally provided JavaScript, we're tracking what people are doing on the website that we care to track, and then when they click submit button, we get that information into our system. Again, it's mainly used with marketing, with campaigns, and allows you functionality of, let's say, involving someone on a marketing campaign when they've downloaded, I don't know, a white page and looked at some sort of a page. So that allows you to trigger various events. Again, if we have time, then we'll take a look at that. This section of application allows you to install applications from a marketplace or by hand. So this will tell you what applications you have installed on the system. I currently don't have any applications installed, so it's blank. When you do, you will have some records here, and it's fairly straightforward thing. All right, moving down, we have set up duplicate rules, languages, translation, portal main page, etc., including the model. So ML model is what I'm talking about the next week. Open webinar, please feel free to come over and just take a listen. Workspace setup, logo customization, color customization, those are general configurations that apply for the entire system. So if you want to quickly adjust the logo, it's fairly straightforward. Go to logo customization, choose the logo that you want to use for your company, override the values that are here, restart your browser, and you get your logo. So that's fairly straightforward. Mobile application wizard will allow us to configure the feel and look of the mobile application that is connected to your instance of Bpm'online. Since I've issued you all cloud versions of Bpm'online, you will be able to use your mobile app. You will use this URL. In your particular case, it's going to be HTTPS something, let's say 2 minus, let's see if I can find one. What is it, 06? Can't find any, don't have anything in my cache, but that would be basically the entire URL string of your instance, and you can connect the mobile application. We'll review that at the very end, how you can configure and what's available to you. It's a little tricky for me to show because I don't have emulator of iOS. I'll try to show you how it works straight from my phone. Hopefully we're not going to have any notification interruptions there. Okay, and then the last section is going to be advanced area. The advanced settings is where we're going to be creating our own tables, where we're going to be administering audit log, where we're going to be administering our own objects, writing some code if we need to, etc., etc. So that's very advanced area. In the beginning, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and create a couple of users, as it's probably going to be the most common task when you first get the system. We'll create a couple of users and then we'll put them in a couple of groups, and then I'll show you how we can configure some basic permissions for user to access one section, not the other, etc., etc. In the meantime, what I want to show you is this. This is called a workplace. So workplace right here, workplace setup, and that the menu or the records available in this workplace setup is what configures what or what's responsible for what we see here in the drop-down list. When we go into this workplace setup, you could see sales, portal, service, etc. We can configure new workplace, and we can assign various permissions. So let's go ahead into sales, and you can see that we have sales. And inside sales, if I click on the open, I'll see the sections that are available in this workplace. So the workplace, let's go to sales. And you can see that I got dashboards, feed, leads. Oops. Should have not clicked on that. You'll see that for sales, we have all these sections. So dashboard, feed, lead, account, contact, all these things, they're called sections. We'll have a section wizard. We'll spend quite a lot of time working with section wizard so you understand the functionality, but those are called sections. Now the permissions are assigned to various employees. So for example, workplace sales is currently available to what's called all employees. I can add some additional employees, and there's the couple of employees or groups of employees. I'm not sure which one it is. So we'll go ahead and try to create something of our own to make sure that we understand how it all works. All right. In order for us to create a system, oh, by the way, any questions so far? So far, so good for everyone? All right. To create new users, we're going to be going to user and administration. We can either go to system user or portal user. The portal user is the user who can access the system as the portal only, and that user is going to be severely limited in the amount of things or amount of stuff that he or she can access. The portal user is designed there to interact with specifically designed sections of the system. So for example, self-service portal allows you to log cases or create new cases, or maybe you want to create some leads, or maybe some of the other basic functionality, take a look at FAQs and etc., etc. If we want to design a section and expose it to a portal user, we have to take some steps. It's going to be a little bit more advanced than we want to get into at this point. So we're not going to be worrying much about the portal user at all. We're going to be concentrating today and throughout this training on system users. In order for us to add a system user, we simply go there and create new. and choose here either portal user or company employee. So we're going to choose obviously company employee. Portal user is not what we want. If we add a company employee, a new page opens up. All we have to do is we have to respect the asterisks. What that means is that we have to file required fields. So for example, here the contact, you could see that it's marked with the red asterisk in the top right corner. That means that the field is required, which means that we cannot save the record without filling it. In order for us to create a new user, we absolutely have to have their contact information. So we have to first go into our contact section, create the contact for the user, and then create the user inside the system. So currently, in my contacts, I have few. And those, so what I've done is I've added this person and I've added myself as two users, and I'm going to be trying to show you how we can interact with them. So there is nothing specific about them. We already opened this profile, so it's Judy, and let's say this is going to be myself. They're currently not employees. They don't have any user permissions, etc. So we're going to go ahead and create them. I'm going to go to System Users. I'm going to go click New, Company Employee. I'm going to choose the contact for which I want to create a new user. Let's select Kirill. The picture will be pulled in automatically from the contact profile. Also, if you later update the picture, it's also going to be available here. Now, I have to come up with the username. So I'm going to give him a username. And then the password. I'm going to use 111 just for simplicity. 111 again. And I'm going to save it. That's all I need to do. That's all I need to do to create a new user. The user in this view are listed by the user login. So not by the contact information, but by the user login. The name of the person is available a little bit further down the list, and it's telling you who that is. So let's click back into the user and see what options are configurable. So first option, the most important one, is going to be what kind of role the person is automatically added to. The roles that the person is added to by default is all employees. All employees is the top node of the tree of hierarchy, and that's when it's basically on the very top of the hierarchy. So everybody who gets entered into the system by default goes into all employees. We'll later modify it. The other information that we can add here is licenses. I currently do not have any licenses. If I needed to apply licenses, a list of licenses would be available to me here, and I'd be able to select what the user can and cannot access. I'll try to show you that maybe at the very end when we're done doing everything else. I'll trigger a license, talk to support just so that they can give me something, and then I'll apply it here. Right delegation allows me to delegate my rights or get my rights elevated to a certain level. This function is usually used when somebody goes on vacation and we need another person to be a deputy of that person. So for example, if controller of the company goes on vacation, somebody needs to do his or her task, that's when we're going to use delegation. If I click on delegate permissions, I can say that I would like to delegate my permission, choose the group of people to whom I'm delegating, or a specific user. So for example, system administrators, I can delegate all my permission to system administrator, and then whatever the permission I have, well, as a Kirill, whatever permission this user has will be delegated to whomever it is that we've delegated. Similarly, if I get permissions, this way I am asking for permission from somebody else. If I am asking for permission from my boss, for example, and he grants it to me, then that means that I will have the same access that he or she has. So that's basically a different way of asking for permissions. And then the access rules allows us to control the range of IP addresses from where a user can log in. If you're using a cloud instance of Bpm'online, then it's probably not all that important unless you can geographically restrict access to the system. If, on the other hand, though, like you're using a local version of Bpm'online, that it's quite useful when you have a well-segmented network. You can control, for example, that accountants can access from this part of the network, and then the marketing people from another, and the sales from, you get the idea. When we're looking at the sessions, we'll see a list of active sessions that the user currently has available. I'll show you how it looks when we edit another user, and we're gonna log on from a different browser. Okay, so that's all I wanted to do right now for the user. The user is created. Let me go ahead and create another company employee, and I'm going to use Judy's contact. I'm going to use Judy. J and same password 123111, and I'm going to save that. now both users are in the system, and what I want to show you is how we can see their active sessions. So I'm going to open an incognito version of my browser, and the reason I'm doing it is so that the browsers don't get confused between where I am a system administrator, where I am Kirill. The reason I use those pictures is so that we can easily identify who we are by looking at ourselves right in the right corner. Let me open this. And I'm going to try to log in as Kirill, for example. When I first log on, my picture will be pulled in. And what I want to do is I want to go into my profile and I want to set my date and time format. I'm going to choose English, Canada, and the default time zone is automatically selected for me. So that's nice that we've set that option. Once I change anything in my profile, I have to log out and log back in. All those settings are downloaded from the system every time we log in. Okay, now that we've logged in, let's take a look what it looks like here. On this end, when I'm going to look at the active sessions, you could see that one active session and the other active session. They will expire on their own at the end. You know, if there was a little bit of inactivity, it will go away from here, and you will be able to figure out which action is active, which is not. This, for example, will eventually go off the list, but you could also tell by hovering over or actually clicking on the one, and the one that is active, you can finish the session. Killing the session is not going to take effect right away. It's probably like a few seconds between the connection is dropped. So if I finish the session, what's going to happen on the other browser is that eventually it will log me out and I will not be able to navigate from place to place. So for example, if I go to contact and I need to make a couple of requests, you could see that the system logged me out and they asked me to log in. Now the reason we're using it is, well, rather than, for example, if we want to do some maintenance, we need to kick everybody out, but somebody left their computer on and our system is configured to expire only after maybe 8 or 10 hours, then it could be quite important for us to kick people out as administrators. The other ones is obviously to control unauthorized access, etc. Okay, so this is how we would log in. Same thing would happen for Judy. If she were to log in, we would be able to see her active sessions. Now let's see what we can configure and how we can put people in different roles. So both of them currently in all employees, and you said that something is opening up here. So they basically have access to the entire system. What I want to do now is I want to separate them into two separate groups, and I want to say, and I want to pretend that, let's say, this user works out of one location and this user works out of the other location, and they're completely separate, or maybe they're different departments. You can figure out why you would want to separate them. But the idea here is that I can control different access to the system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click on this organizational structure button. And I have some org structure inherited from demo stand. You don't really have to worry about it when you get the system in production, but in the demo stand, we all have this ITIL basically recommended structure. So what we are going to do is we're going to click all employees right now. And by the way, if you collapse all employees group, you'll see that you have two top nodes in the tree. So you've got the root node, all employees, and another root node, all portal employees. In this particular version, once the user is created in one, it cannot be used in the other. However, the version being that is released in a week from now, you can move people around from one node to another. So that would significantly improve or speed up the conversion of, let's say, a portal user to an employee back to a portal user, et cetera, et cetera. So let's say that we have all employees. If I want to create a group inside all employees, what I would need to do is I would need to put my mouse on a group where I want to create a subgroup, click New, choose Organization. Currently, we have two options, organization and division. The difference is that division can be a sub of organization, but the organization cannot be a sub of division. So division cannot have any subs. It's reserved for future expansion. It was built in the permission model. It's not currently used, so it's probably best if we just stick to organizations at this point because it's a little bit more powerful than division. But just know the difference that the division cannot be that division cannot have children underneath it. Only organization can. So let's create a new group. We're going to call it Toronto. And I'm going to put myself there only. I'm going to add existing user. And I'm going to close that. Now, when we create something here, there's, like you saw, there was a little pop-up saying that something is modified. I need to update it. There's another visual indication, this little exclamation mark, please update roles. Updating roles is quite easy, and the reason we're not doing it is because we're building the structure right now, and rather than going to the database every time to update something, we're aggregating all the changes, and then it's going to be submitted as one transaction to the database. So for now, we're not going to be updating anything, but let's go ahead and create another group, and I'm going to put my mouse on all employees again. I'm going to click on, New, Organization, and let's create a new group called Boston. I'm going to click on the plus for users and add existing user, and I'm going to choose Judy now. And I'm going to close that. Now I can go ahead and update my roles. Now the interesting part about the roles, when I'm hovering over and when I'm going in the edit mode, is that the roles by default, they have what's called a managers group. Managers group allows me to, for every group inside any group, to have a manager. Imagine the situation, for example, where let's take an accounting department. I'm familiar with that department the most. Simply, I spent a lot of time in it. So let's say you have an accounting department, and the structure is quite simple. You have a controller or CFO of the company who's got access to everything that has to do with accounting. And then you've got a couple of people working underneath that controller. So for example, you've got somebody in AR, and accounts receivable, and AP, or accounts payable, and maybe a general account and the cost account, and et cetera, et cetera. Let's say AR will have access to sections such as banks and aging, and the AP person will have access to ability to cut checks and do things like that. So clearly they need to have separate access. If I enable managers group for, let's say, AR or AP and put a controller there, that means that the controller will automatically inherit all the permissions granted to all users in that group. So without specifying specific permission for a controller, I can set him as a manager of all the subordinate structures, and then the controller will automatically inherit all those groups or inherit all those permissions, basically making sure that the manager always have access to the elements that the subordinate employees have. Now, it's kind of a blessing in disguise. On one hand, it's quite convenient and it's quite nice. On the other hand, if you manage organizational structure in so much other way, it might create a bit of a confusion in terms of where the permissions are coming from. So when you're starting off with the system, it's not that it's recommended, but it's my personal preference to uncheck this button and make sure that we don't get any managers group simply because it might confuse us in the future. Again, the choice is yours, but for now, you can either uncheck it or you can keep checked. And if you keep it checked, then you, by all means, you have to select the manager. Now, this field will come handy when we are using business processes and we are submitting some records for approval. So for example, we're building our expense report as part of this training, and we're going to say that I want somebody to approve my expense report. Let's say I want to send it to my manager. Well, if I have this option enabled, then I can automatically send it to my manager, and whoever's listed here as the manager of this group will get a notification saying that somebody's asking for your approval. If I don't have this field selected, then I have to use some other means to figure out who my manager is. Maybe I will ask a question who should be going to approval for, or maybe I will have my business process design in such a way that I can figure out through some other logical elements. So what I'm going to do for now is I'm going to uncheck this, And I'm going to do the same thing for Toronto, and I'm going to uncheck that. I don't like those options. Okay, now that it's done, what I can do is I can go ahead and update my roles. System tells me that the roles updated successfully. It's fairly easy update. We only created two groups, two users, so nothing much for system to do. Can easily handle it. Okay, now that this is done, we can start worrying about assigning permissions to different users. Let's take a look how records are managed. From what you can see right away is if you go to any section, contacts, accounts, opportunities, leads, it doesn't matter. When you open any account, let's open this record, you will see that under actions, access, set up access rights. You will see who can use these rules for what type of edit mode. So for example, to read the record, the rules are granted to all portal users, to supervisor, and to all employees. For editing, permissions granted to all employees and the supervisor, and to delete, the actions granted to supervisor and all employees. These rules on a record-by-record basis, we can modify from this interface. And for example, I can say that I want to go ahead and add a read access right and grant it to somebody. So let's say to Kirill. And there's Kirill. And the permission is granted to him right now. I can save this record. And once this user logs in, he will be able to read these records. Now, the idea here is that for every record in the system, we can control who has permissions. Currently, the system is designed by default, basically. It's designed that all employees have pretty much access to everything record related. So we're going to go ahead and change that behavior. So when the user logs in, he will only see some records, not the others. To do that, we need to go into a cogwheel and flip down to the advanced settings. Advanced settings at this point, if you're following the my demonstration, make sure that you have pop-up notification enabled. If it shows up, just make sure that it's enabled. Otherwise, you won't see this tab loading. The first time this tab loads, it might take a little longer. Next time you load it, it's going to be much, much faster. Any questions at this point while we're waiting? Can a user belong to more than one group? Absolutely. You can belong to many groups. In fact, this is recommended setting, and the belongingness or association with various groups is how you would probably configure your functional role. So if you are performing a couple of functions within the organization, maybe you're performing the function of an accountant and a sales manager at the same time, then you will have you will be enrolled in various groups, and that's how you will manage permissions. All right. When this page loads, you will be presented with three tabs. The first tab is going to say access right. The second one is configuration. The third one is the change log. The change log is where we configure audit log, and we configure the areas, and we monitor values of the changing records. We're going to look at it a little bit later. Configuration has to do with the functionality that we're trying to enhance. And again, we're going to be using it quite a lot, but just a little bit later. To assign access rights, we need to stay on the first tab that opens up. And when this tab opens up, there is a divider at the bottom of the page. So what you want to do is you want to drag it up a little bit higher, just so that we can see what actual permissions are configured. On the left-hand side, in this title box, what you will see is the name of various elements that are making up the sections. Now, to make it a little bit easier, you can see that it's at all objects right now. Let's click on this chevron pointing down and say that we're only interested in all sections. And what the system will do, it will group together all elements that make up one section. So for example, you could see that now I only have one account and only one contact. On the other hand, if I go to all objects and I search by using this simple filter, and I'll say contact, I will get quite a few. Now, I don't really want to be using and figuring out which object I should be using. So I'm going to go ahead and say I only want to see by section, and then the permissions will apply to the entire section and its all underlying object rather than going one by one. If, on the other hand, you need to have a granular control over what components of the action from the object model then you can switch to see all object and then configure each individually. But it's probably something you want to do when you're on the advanced level and you fully understand how the system works. Okay, so let's go on the contact. Let's select the contact and let's review some of these options. All right, so the contact currently has checkbox in the column managed by records. It has no checkbox in managed by columns and no checkbox managed by operations. Now, what this whole thing means, our records can be configured in a few different ways. So you can access it, for example, from the outside system via some APIs. That's going to be one way of accessing the system. The second way of controlling the permission is going to be on a table level. So imagine you have a table called contact, which you do. It's right here. And, if you want to deny permissions for the entire table, then you will use what's called managed by operations. Managed by operations will be the rules that are applied to managed by operations are going to be in this tab, access to object. So these guys, the access and checkboxes, they set the property of whether or not object can be controlled by operation, by record, or by column, whereas the bottom part of the designer will actually specify the rules that govern the access permission. If I want to access object for external services, for example, if I want to grant someone permission to access this particular table or a set of tables from outside, for example, from APIs, I would create a new user and give him permission to read, create new, edit, or delete these records. This is probably the only part of the system where supervisor has the access and not all employees. So by default, if you're logging in with somebody who's not a supervisor into the system in the default configuration, you will not be able to use OData APIs to get some information out. If you want to change that behavior, simply click on the new. It brings up another list, and then you choose a user who you want to add into this access object. You can use a search button and search by this name and then just simply select it, or select it from a drop-down list by clicking new and then just choosing the person. If that's, it depends how you want. In our case, it's very simple configuration, so I don't need to be using searches, and that's why I prefer the soft key model rather than the one with a lot of data. So I'm going to go and delete this user. I don't want it to interfere. Now let's review managed by records. Managed by records corresponds to specific permissions that we can assign for read operation, edit operation, and delete operation for every row contained in the contact table. It is exactly the same permissions that you see by going into any record and clicking on actions, set up access rates. You remember that we've added this by hand, so let's go ahead and delete it. Now we see that all employees, supervisor, and all portal users have permission granted. Let's inspect what we see here. Instead of going to delete, let's go back to read, and we'll see that we have all employees, all employees, all employees, all portal users. And then the access level is defined here. So how do I read this thing? You read this thing. So for the object contact, we're allowing managed by records, and that's because we have this checkbox set. Now, the rule, records created by all employees or by members of a group, all employees, will be visible for read operation by all employees with the access level, and that's the access level grant with delegation. Records created by all employees or any employee is visible to all portal employees without delegation, just a simple read. So let's go ahead and create our own record and modify this. Let's delete all of them. And let's create our own rule. Let's say that I want records created by somebody in Toronto only be visible to somebody in Toronto. So what I'm going to use is created by Toronto, visible to Toronto. And records created by somebody in Boston only visible to somebody in Boston. Oops. Now, we did that for the read permission. We would need to do the same thing for edit and delete. Let's switch to delete right away. Usually, deleting records is a function in the CRM system that is heavily controlled, and you don't want people just going and deleting records just because they feel like deleting records, because they may not even have a full grasp on who we're deleting. They think that they're deleting record that only they work with, but then some other people need it. So usually this is a very highly controlled operation that you want to control, basically. So let's go ahead and make sure that we delete all employees and create a new rule saying that records created by, I don't care who, by all employees, are only system administrator can do that. Okay, so what we've done here is we've said that records created by any employee of the company can be deleted only by system administrator, and that permission cannot be delegated to anybody else. So this is kind of how I like my contacts configured. And now the last one, the edit, I will simply go ahead and copy the information, not copy, but redo the information from the read access to the edit access. So I'm going to say that records created by users in Toronto can only be edited by users in Toronto, and records created by users in Boston, can be edited by people there. Okay, so let's save this thing. Now everything is saved automatically. We don't really need to go and reapply changes. It works in a slightly different way. You could see that the interface looks quite different. It's what's called a version 5, and then this front end is what's called a version 7. So let's go ahead and now log on as a new user who belongs to either Toronto or Boston. To do that, we're going to switch back to our incognito browser and log in as this guy again. Okay, let's go to our contacts. What we see in contacts is not much has changed. We can still see this record and we can still see this record. And the reason this is happening is because we changed the access permission after those records were applied. Thus, when the record is created, these rules that we just implemented did not exist and they were different. So basically the idea here is that once we change the access permissions, the system will not go back into its own records and say, let's reapply the access permission to already existing rules based on whatever I just put in. It will use them only for the new records that I am creating from now on going forward. Now, for some people, it's a desirable outcome. For others, it's not so much. If you want to respect the access permissions that you currently put in place on all the records that already basically exist or pre-existing records, then you need to execute a SQL script to update the records to respect your new permissions. It's not something that you can do something on your own. You probably want to contact support. They will send you an SQL script, which is very easy to do, but you don't have it. So if you need it, you can ask me how to do it. I'll send you the script. It's a fairly easy thing to do, but the bottom line is you can't do it by any user tools. We don't have a button to say apply new permission model to all records. You actually have to do a little bit of work with code. Okay, but let's see what happens when I'm going to go and create my new user. So I'm going to create new contact and I'm going to give him some names, new Toronto. And that's because I belong to Toronto group right now. All right, that's enough for me to create something. So new Toronto. And I want to go to actions and set up access rights just to see what permissions are granted. So you could see that the permission is granted to Toronto, it's granted, edit granted to users of Toronto, and then the delete is granted to system administrator. But this guy, K Krylov, and K Krylov persist on every record. And that's because I created the record. So when I create the record, I always inherit full access permission to this specific record. So no matter what kind of permissions are assigned to me, I will always be able to go into the records that I create unless system administrator goes and removes me from this record. This is how the system works. Now let's save this record. Let's log out and let's go as Judy and see whether or not you can see this record. So I'm going to go as J Krylov 111, log in. And let's go into contacts. Now you can see that Judy does not see the group, the contact that we just created, New Toronto. Now let's see what happens if I go as the system administrator. System administrator has ultimate access to everything. Let me refresh this page. And there's my New Toronto. So I could see that as a system administrator, but I cannot see that as Judy. Let me create new contact and I'll call it New Boston. I'll save that and I'll inspect the properties of my access. Set up access rights and I'll see that Judy has been assigned and all people of Boston have been granted permission to read. All people of Boston have been granted permission to edit, and Judy herself, and all people, all system administrators granted permission to delete, and Judy herself. Let me save this record and close this. Now, what happens if, for example, I am going to refresh it again, go to New Boston as the system administrator, open my access permissions, access rights, and say that I want to delete you from here. So I just want to make sure that Judy, let's say, doesn't have access to deleting. We can do it in a slightly more automated way, but you have to wait until the last day to see how it's done. Let me save that. Now, I am as Judy. I'm going to go back into my contact list. I'm going to go into New Boston. And I want to inspect the access rights. So the administrator, system administrator, has made some changes, and I no longer am listed here under delete. Let me try to go into actions, into actions from the register and try deleting this record. Are you sure? Yes, I am. And it's telling me that I am unable to delete selected record. View details. View details will give us some permission if we wanted to see like what it's rated to. But the idea here is that once we make some changes to who can delete it, that the person from whom we've taken away can no longer delete it. So that's the basic idea here. Okay, so let me review some of the questions. Okay, so far what I've been using, the question relates to whether or not we can access permission to specific users. So let's modify our default permission here for the contact and say that for the delete operation, I want to grant the permissions to people, to records created by Boston, to myself. And I myself is not a group. I myself is just a user. So what I'm saying here is records created by anyone who belongs to a group of Boston can be deleted by Kirill. Okay, let me now switch to my other browser, create new contact, and I'll create new Boston 2. I'll save this record, go in, go under actions, set up access rights, and you could see that my name is now listed right here. So when we're accessing permissions, we can design our model to go by user-specific rights or by group-specific rights. It is always recommended to use groups rather than individual users, because when we enroll people or subscribe people to various groups, we don't really need to change our permission model, whereas if we use user-specific access model, then every time somebody leaves the company or joins the company, we can't just add them to a group. We actually have to go on every single object and redesign our permissions. So it's going to be a lot more difficult to maintain well-designed access permissions that way. So it's always recommended. Plus, when we're using integration, let's say with Active Directory or some other LDAP supported directories, then we are probably going to be pulling people into groups and then seeing their membership in the group and managing it that way anyway. So the recommendation is always to use groups when possible, and only in certain cases use user-specific access permissions. Okay, so this is how we would address permissions based on the row. And again, we have access to the entire table, but only to the records within the table. So the first check was, do I have access to the table? And the answer is yes. Then we go inside the rows and say, okay, do I have access to the row or not? The other interesting thing is when we're exporting something out of the system, we can only see and we can only export things that we have permissions to. If I were to go and build some dashboards here, I would only see records that I have access to. So my dashboard you could see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 records. I only see 5 records here. By the way, if you want to quickly see how many records you've got on the list view, you can go under View, Set up Summaries, and Display Number of Records. Let's save that, and that will tell you that you have 5 records available. If I switch now to my entire dashboard and it tells me number of contacts, it's telling me that I have 5 contacts. If, on the other hand, I go as the supervisor and I do the same thing, set up summaries, display number of records, it will tell me that there's 9 contacts in the system. So the user here, because of their permission, depending on how many records they see, will see one number, and that's not necessarily that the other person will see. So that will assure that we have access only to the right data. When you're configuring your dashboard, bear in mind that you can only, that the information visible inside the actual dashboard will be based on the records you have access to. So if you're building, let's say, some sort of a sales report or some sort of a sales analytics to see how many sales you've done, you break it down by territory, et cetera, you will only see numbers that you have access to. So it may not encompass the entire set of records. So it's kind of important stuff. Okay, so we kind of talked about what we're doing here. Now, how can we do something that we can share records? Well, based on this rule that we just created, so default permissions for delete, let's say that we wanted to create another group who will have access to the entire system. So all we would need to do is we would need to create a group, let's say corporate office, and in corporate office, people would see records created in all offices. So what we would do is just like here, we say Boston, corporate office, Toronto, corporate office. Now it's a little bit of work that you need to do for every group, but once it's done, it works great. So that's how you would share information between the offices. When Judy, for example, signs in and she says that, you know what, I've created this contact and I really need someone to work on it. So for example, this new Boston, and she opens it up and she goes, I want to grant some specific person access to this contact for whatever reason. Let's assume that this is not a contact, but this is some other section. Maybe it's our expense report, or maybe it's opportunity that she's assigned to. She can go to access rights and she can say, I want to give new read access. You could also see that the delete access right is no longer available to her because she herself has no access to delete options. So since we don't have that permission, then we can delegate it to anyone, we can do anything. But because she has granted with delegation permitted, she can delegate permission or access to this record to somebody else. So similarly, she can say, read, access level, let me grant, new access level. She will choose the new user and save the record. Now when Kirill logs in, he will be able to see this new Boston. Let's exit. Log in as him. And go to contacts. And I will be able to now see new Boston when logged in as Kirill. Similarly, Kirill can grant it to her, etc. Any questions on this part? Okay, no questions. Let's move on then. I want to now look at access permissions by operations. Now you could see that the access permission by operation is disabled, and I'm going to do something that's kind of irreversible going forward. But later when we design something of our own, I can show you a better place to enable this option. You're not yet familiar with the concept of packages, but basically the package is a placeholder to store information related to any customizations that we are making. The package information is going to be available to us in this configuration section, and once we get there, I'll explain what is stored there. But by now, remember that everything that we're doing here is this information is stored somewhere. We can export it and import it back into some other production environment. So let's say it's our development environment or testing environment. We configure something here, and then by use of packages or self-contained files or archives, we can export information out of the system and import it into a live production. So when you configure something in pre-production, you can easily export it and then populate the live one. Now, when we're doing this import and export, it's important to understand which package the data is stored in. In all your configuration, the data is stored in the custom package. It's actually the name custom. And then we're changing the properties here. We are recording everything in the custom package or current package. When we're going to be doing it later on, I will show you how we can store this information in some other place that is easily exportable to another production environment. That's going to be important for those folks who have pre-production and then the production and then maybe a dev environment of some sort. So that's going to be important for some, not for others. Okay. Let's make sure that we can access something by operations. So I'm going to do it again on the contact, and I'm going to click on this X button. Once I click on it, the system, we're going to go into a self-configuration mode, and it will rebuild itself and recompile itself with that option enabled. Every time we do something here, the system, Bpm'online with its core, will take itself down, take that configuration, build new libraries, compile them, and then bring the IIS back up. IIS is one of the components that we're using to host the application. Now this process, depending on your, basically how beefy your computer is or how beefy your cloud is, will vary from a couple of seconds to maybe a couple of minutes. It will also depend how much information you have and how many support procedures we have to run, how much stuff basically we have to shut down. My laptop is fairly, well, it's not very powerful. It's some sort of an i5 with 8 gigs of RAM. So it usually takes 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds, depending on the day. So I have to sit and we have to sit and wait. While this operation is proceeding, and you can see loading, the system is unavailable. If I try to log in from a different browser, I would basically get that loading page, and nothing would be available to me. And that's because everything is being shut down, recompiled, and then brought back up. There's no other way of doing it. So just have to be patient. When you're doing something in the cloud, especially when you guys are doing it for demo stands that I've issued, when we're issuing demo stand, we're not really committing to any level of service at this point. Demos are issued quite in great numbers. So your system might be a little bit slower than what you would normally experience in production, not a little bit, but quite a lot slower, depending on the load of the cloud. Okay, so my side is done. And what I can do now is I can start managing permissions by operations. Permissions by operations are going to be access to object. That's the tab that corresponds to manage by operation. When you enable something on the in this field, two rules are automatically created for you. All portal employees and all employees automatically have some permissions configured for them. You can see that all portal employees have the operation to read the data from the table. They don't have access to create new, they don't have access to edit anything, and they don't have access to delete anything. All employees, on the other hand, have access to everything because checkbox is set against every single field. So what I want to do now is I want to go and get rid of the portal users to begin with. And I also want to go and get rid of all employees. And what I want to do is I want to create a new rule here. And I want to say that I want to pick somebody from Toronto, for example. I'm going to go inside all employees and find my Toronto group. Click OK. And then I want to assign some permission to this specific user or to this group of users. Now, the way we assign it to one group is exactly the same how you would assign to 2, 5, 10, whatever menu group. So let's stick to 1 for now. And let's say that I want to deny permission to delete anything. I want to deny permission to edit anything. And I want to deny permission to create something new. Now, I'm going to go and log out from here. And I'm going to go back in. Okay, let me go back into my contacts. And what we've configured is that we have permissions to read and nothing else. Well, it looks like I can still read stuff. But let's see if I can go ahead and modify it. So there's my new Toronto. And let's say that I want to modify some values here. Let's say it's going to be the auditor. I click Save. So even though I have access permission granted to me on the record level on the table row, the system is still complaining, telling me that I have insufficient permissions to edit record in the object contact. So this section, or permissions granted on the table level, override whatever I have on the default permissions. So first, we figure out if I have access to the table and what kind of access I have. When I do, then we go inside and look at the record. So it's kind of a nested model. So this is the least resource intensive operation. And if this is sufficient for you to configure access to system, then by all means use this and don't touch the default permissions. It is not sufficient though for many people. So that's why we have this nested log. So first we figure out the table. If I've got access to it, then we go into the row. And if that's not enough, then we can go into columns, and you could ascertain that by looking at the title of this column heading. So let's go ahead and turn off read permissions and see what happens. I'll log out and log back in. And at this point, I don't even see the section contacts. You could see that it's kind of hidden from me. I can't find it where it once was. It's not in marketing. It's not in general. I only have accounts. It's not in my sales. It would be somewhere here. And then it's not in my service. So I don't see them. But I know that I can get to my accounts by going at and looking at the default contact of a specific person. So let's see how that works. I'm going to go and open one of the accounts. And it says Extrudex aluminum. So that's something that I've created. So let me show you what it looks like when the system administrator looks at it. When I go and look at the Extrudex aluminum as the sysadmin, oh, nothing happened here. Sorry, let me put somebody here. Let me just set, who's that? Andrew. Let's say Andrew is going to be for Extrudex. And let's go and let's open Extrudex, make sure it's there. Okay, there, Andrew is set. And let me navigate to cases, back to my accounts, just to make sure everything is saved, and go back to my Extrudex. So you can see that my primary contact is hidden, and it's hidden from every section. So the system is smart enough to figure out that you don't have access to the contact information. And that's why we're not seeing anything in this field where otherwise a default contact would show up. So when we're building some sort of associations, we will still be able to use this data, but it's concealed from us on the presentation level. Hopefully that makes sense. All right. Let's see if I can find contacts who have Andrew Baker as my manager. So let's go into my filters and see how that works. Let's switch to advanced mode and say I want to see accounts whose contact, and you could see that the contact account is also hidden from me. So I can't use this functionality as my filter. So I can't find accounts for whom Andrew Baker, let's say, is the default contact. So this whole contact is kind of excluded from me. Like I can say quantity and try to select something, but it's not allowing me to set anything else. I shouldn't be able to find anything here. And let's say name, full name, select equals Andrew, and I'll apply, or maybe it contains Andrew. So I can't see any records, right? Otherwise, I would have been able to find. So if I implement the same filter on this side, obviously I'd find extrude X. Okay, so that's basically what my access permission by on the table level does to my stuff, to my records. The next thing is, let's say we're going to allow read, we're going to apply new, we're going to allow edit, but we're going to keep delete reserved for system administrators only. So as you would expect, the contacts are going to be placed back to my original configuration of the workplace. They're my contacts. I can see them now. And where's my, let's say New Toronto. I'll open this guy so I can do anything and everything I want. I can still go and edit the record, and that's fine. But what I cannot do is I shouldn't be able to delete this record. You don't have permission to delete the record. So this will prevent me from deleting the record. So the last, you remember in the default permissions, we had an option of configuring who's got rights to delete it. And if I want to deny it company-wide for all employees, access to table is probably the best place for me to do that. So I make sure that nobody can delete the records, or specific groups cannot delete the records when when that rule is configured. Okay, and the last one that I want to show you is how we can manage something by columns. Again, I have to click on the X to turn it into a checkbox. The system will go through its paces, and when it's done, when everything is restored to normal, to operational level, we'll be able to set permissions for specific columns. Now, we already talked about access to the table, then I said rows, and now we're going into columns. So you could see how we're going from very top level to a more granular level, right? So obviously, when the system is trying to figure out something on the very top level, the resources required to perform that level of permission evaluation every time record is requested is significantly lower than if we have to go and check every column and every row for a specific user. So when you're configuring your system to fit your needs, be cognizant of the fact that the more permissions are assigned by column, the more resource intensive the operation of read, edit, and delete are going to be. In some rare cases where people mistakenly configured the entire system to be managed by columns, the performance was degraded to a point that basically we needed to intervene, right? And we needed to reset it back. So those type of permissions are reserved for some fields, for specific fields. For example, social security or social insurance number, depending on the country you're from. Maybe a credit card number, you don't want to show it to people. Those type of fields you want to manage, let's say, by columns. Otherwise, you probably 99% of the time will be satisfied with managing permissions by records and on the table level, which will not going to be a very resource intensive. While we're waiting for the system, please do let me know if you have any questions, if everything is clear so far. Okay, so my end is done. So now I can click on columns permission, the last tab that we're going to look at in this section. And what this system is doing now, it's building a list of columns on the contact. It's got a lot of tabs and fields and all that stuff, and all this great stuff is available to us here. So let's look at some of them. Let's flip to contact. Let's open any contact. Let's say this new Toronto, and we have some fields, so we can play with full name, we can play with title, recipient name, gender, etc. So let's make some changes. Well, gender, for example, let's go ahead and create a rule that we can't see anything gender related. We want to be gender, we don't want to be building anything based on gender. So what we want to do is on our contact, make sure that, maybe I need to refresh this page, that we're not able to see that field. I'll go back into my sections, go back to my contact. Okay, and what you can see is that gender, as we have this little pencil, it's available to all employees. Let's delete this rule, and let's say that the new rule is going to be that all employees, instead of using this, nobody will see it. However, let's say this guy, user specific, not group specific, I'm purposely choosing a user, this guy will have access to editing it, and this person, Judy, will have a slightly different permission. She will be able to see it, but not edit. So we'll give her a little magnifying glass. So everything is configured. Let's go ahead under this user again. We'll exit. And we'll log back in. 111. So let's go into our contact. Let's take this new Toronto. And let's make sure that Judy first can see it from the record perspective. So I'm going to go access rights, and I'll make sure that I give her access to read. I'll give her access to edit, and I'll give her access to delete. So she should have full access to the entire system, and I'll save that. Okay, now I'm going to go and say new Toronto is going to be, let's say, a male. And I'm going to save this record. Insufficient. Probably because we did something on the table. Access to objects. Yes, so Toronto. Interesting. Okay, so I can't have, I can't make any changes to gender. Okay, interesting. So I locked myself out here. So let's go back to column permissions and just verify that. Yes, so Kirill can only view but cannot edit. Slightly different. So I want to do it this way. Sorry, I made a mistake here. All right, let me log out, log back in. I apologize, my mistake. So let's go back to contacts. Let's go to new Toronto, open it, and let's change the gender value to male. I'll save this now. No problem with permissions. I'll close it, open it. Okay, the record's saved. Fantastic. I'm going to log out and log back in as Judy. J, log in. We forgot to give her access to objects. So new, and let's give it to all employees so everybody can see it. And I'll get rid of this rule. Fortunately, I forgot that too. And now again, exit get back in. So when you're playing with permissions, it's a lot of logging in, logging out if you're not careful, like I am now. Okay, so she should have contacts back on. And let's go to New Toronto. Okay, so I can see the records. Okay, so I can see the records here, right? It says male, but what if I try to change it to female? I'll try to save that, and it's telling me that I don't have the permission to save this gender value. So, which is exactly the behavior I tried to demonstrate. Now, let's see if I can go and modify this permission on the, on the column permission. I want to make sure that Judy can't even see it, like period. She can't even see the value. So currently it's sitting as male, and when I go as Judy with that permission, I need to go as her, not as me. And now, when she goes back in and she tries to log out, log back in. Now when she's trying to see the value, she shouldn't be able to see the value, period. So let's say, New Toronto, open it up, and the gender value is concealed from her. So it looks like it's not set, period, but it's not true. The value is set, she doesn't know what it is. She cannot tell the difference between value not set and the value concealed from her. To her, it's exactly the same thing. It appears as if there is nothing in it. She may go in and try to put a value here and try to save the information, but the system is going to tell her that the information is simply she doesn't have permissions to edit the column. Now, nothing is telling her that she doesn't have permissions to, nothing is telling her she doesn't have permission to read it, but unfortunately, that's how it works. So we can conceal this information from a user, but then the user is slightly confused about whether or not the information is null or it's simply invisible to her. So that's just a bit of a caveat to remember when users are bugging you, saying that, oh, how come the system doesn't have the values in it? And that's probably because we disallow them access to read that particular column. So just like I set up the gender, we can set up things like social security number, social insurance number, and other sensitive information. Now the access permission, like I said, it's now a little bit more resource intensive to access every contact record. It will take a little bit longer because the system has to go first check access to table, then access to the row, then go and check every single table, every single column in the table to figure out if I can show you the value or not. Now, when you have that permission set for specific records, access from the APIs from OData will respect all those permissions. So whatever you configure on in this advanced settings and whatever permissions you're configuring, you don't have to go and reconfigure it for access on the API. You can still go ahead and start using them. They're already implemented for all objects in the system. You can use it, and only data with permissions you have access to will be visible to you through API. So you can find kind of a backdoor here. It's all protected. All right, we've been at permissions for about an hour and a half. Any questions so far, please do let me know so I can maybe explain if it's not clear. If everything is clear, maybe let's take a bit of a break, 10 minutes, if that's what you guys prefer, and then we'll move on to something else today. Hopefully we all had a good break. Let's move on to customization, further customization of our system. I'm going to, close the wrong one. All right, we're back on. So what we're going to be doing is going to go to System Designer, and inside System Designer, I want to introduce you to a notion of packages and kind of go over what the packages are, and then we're going to start writing some stuff into it. So in the advanced settings, we're going to be accessing second tab now. And the second tab is here, configuration. You should be able to access it. Okay. And in the configuration, in the default settings, what we have now is we have a list of packages in the middle column here. This is a list of functionality that is available to us, developed when you get the system out of the box by Bpm'online. However, in some cases, you might see additional packages installed here. So if you're installing application from a marketplace or from files that you somehow obtain, then you will see all new stuff basically added here as its own package. Package is a self-contained group of files that define certain functionality within the system. So for example, we have a base package, a base ENU, base obsolete, etc., etc. So there's quite a lot of packages right now in the system. And if you want to see how these packages relate and what is dependent on what, you can click immediately on the package dependencies tab, which will build a visual representation of the hierarchy of our packages. Now, currently, I'm using full bundle. So there's quite a lot of functionality that is built into the system. And as you can expect, there's going to be quite a lot of packages. The idea behind this tree is on the top level, you have the top packages from where things depend. So for example, this NUI package will be dependent on the base package, and the base package is the core package which a lot of things inherit from. You can go through the model of this inheritance and you can scroll left to right, up and down to see what's where, but every single package that you're seeing in this middle column will be represented somewhere here. And you can see that the tree is quite extensive. And if you need to inherit certain functionality, you need to find either the package where it's implemented or the other packages from which you can inherit that already have this functionality. So the idea here is you have a custom package, and the custom package basically inherits from everything. So in custom package, when you're making any changes to the system, you've got everything available to you. You can trace these errors and see how it basically lists every single package in the system that is available to you. Now, there is another way of doing it, and what I have created for myself here is I've created what's called a custom package, and it's called Academy Web Services Demo, and it's a package that I will be storing information from the webinar that I'm doing a week from now, and that will have to do just with the web services that our system can do. In your case, the package that you're creating is going to be, not creating, but the package that you are going to be writing everything is going to be a custom package. Now, in order for you to create a new package, all you need to do is click on the packages somewhere and create a new one. Now, choosing the dependencies is going to be fairly here. By right-clicking anywhere on any of the packages, you can click on Add, Create New One, give it a name. So let's say Academy Demo or Training. Let's call it Training Demo. We can give it a description. First thing though we have to do is we have to save it and then go back to it and inherit some functionalities into this package. Once it's saved, we can find it somewhere here. Training, where's my training demo? Right. Fresh. There's my training demo. Okay, so here's my training demo. What I can do on it now is I can right-click on the training demo, click Edit, go inside and start adding the packages from which I will depend. Now, we're not going to go into details of which package I need to select, to build some of my functionality that's covered in basically development class. Inside the development, my colleague will tell you the functionality that is included in some, but you can already ascertain some of that stuff. So for example, if you're not using any integration with Active Directory or other directory services, then you probably don't need this LDAP, or you probably don't need this junk filter, etc., etc. So you will only be using the stuff that you need. Now, if you're developing a functionality for your client as the partner, you probably want to inherit only from packages that the client will have. Otherwise, for example, right now, my package, this Academy web services, inherits from absolutely everything. So I've got everything available to me, including service, marketing, and sales. And if somebody wants to install it, who only have access to, let's say, sales as part of their purchase bundle, then they may not be able to use some of the functionality that I include in my package, simply because I am using dependencies that they do not have. So it's important to understand that dependencies will govern the functionality that you have with the system. Just like any other software development, we have dependencies, and they're listed as part of the packages. Once you configure the dependencies, what we would need to do is you would need to go into the main interface, go into the system settings, and um, look for a couple of settings. So let's do package, current package. In my case, current package setting is set to go to the Academy Web Services demo. So this one on the very top. In your case, it's going to be saying custom package. It doesn't really matter for the purpose of this demonstration where we're saving it, as long as we're going to the right place. Okay, so that's all I wanted to show you currently. Now there is another package called custom package ID, and in my case, it goes to to custom package. Now, what this setting does is where all the default configurations are saved, where I don't have the access to define specifically which package it is. So for example, those access permissions that we've been configuring are currently stored in the custom package. If we go in the custom package, a couple of fields, not custom package, but any package at all, a couple of things are going to be visible to us. We're going to see schemas, we're going to see external assemblies, SQL scripts, data, there's going to be a lot of data later, and package dependencies. Now, the schemas will tell us modifications about anything programmatically that we're modifying. So for example, we're designing a user interface, it will be a schema. We're designing a object, for example, we're adding a column in a database, it will be recorded here. We're doing anything else, modules, etc., it's going to be all represented here as a schema. And when we get to create our own sections, our own business processes, they're all going to be recorded as part of the schema. External assemblies allow us to upload files that you program somewhere outside Bpm'online. So for example, there are going to be .NET libraries that allow you to perform certain functionality. Maybe it's the file that has to do with connecting to your own proprietary system, or maybe it's the file that does some calculations on potential customers, etc. Whatever that is, as long as it's a .NET library that can be interfaced with, we can interface. And the way we interface with those libraries, again, that's going to be covered in the development class, not so much in the administration customization. All we need to know is that if we upload some assemblies into here, then we can use it. So for example, one of those assemblies could be uploaded. Well, let's just imagine that there are some SDK for creating a GoToMeeting or a Zoom meeting, just like we're using now. So if I uploaded those SDKs, I could use those methods and that functionality from inside Bpm'online. That makes it very, very easy to integrate with with other systems. Again, we're not going to be talking much about it. SQL scripts. This is the place where you would store your SQL scripts that need to update, delete, or do any modifications to the tables inside the system. You don't have access to SQL scripts, to SQL database when you're working with the cloud version. So if you need to modify something, it's important for you to be able to at least execute those scripts when you're trying to update something. One such implementation or one such need will be when you need to update access permissions to respect the currently configured permission rather than the ones that existed when you created the record. If this is what you need to do, then SQL script will be added here by clicking the add button. You upload your script or the file. You can just go and type it up, give it a name, and validate, save, and then execute. So this is how you would use SQL scripts. Again, we're not going to be using much of it. All right, so these are my packages. On the left-hand side, what you have is the bunch of options that we can perform. So you could see open list of workplaces, open list of repositories, export something to file, compile, restore, etc., etc. So all these functions is something that the system can perform for you, and they're very much the development function that we as the analyst, we may need to use some of them. For example, when we are happy with the package that we've created and we've made all the modifications in our pre-production environment, and we want to take this package and we want to export it just so that we can import it somewhere on the production system, we'll say export package to file. And this will export this whole thing into an archive export. It will export the whole thing into an archive, and it will allow us to take that file and move it from one place to another. This is one of the ways that you can move settings from one place to another. The other is by use of SVN, where we configure to a common repository from which various people can either update or download those changes. Again, that's something that we're going to cover in the development class of our in the development class and not here. Now, in terms of the position 0, when we're creating a package, it's a setting right now that is not really respected in the hierarchy. And what it's for is when we have the same name, for the package. So let's say somebody created AR package. Let's just say that it's AR, and then they set it 0, and then somebody else can say AR1. So we have the dependencies of what inherits what. And again, that's going to be covered in the development. We don't really need to worry about it. For now, let's just, if we're creating packages, which we probably don't want to do, just keep position at 0. Okay, so like I said, most of the stuff that we're configuring is going to be recorded here. And my custom package, and that's something that I quickly created a modification, you could see that I have what's called a contact already. Now, what's in the contact? If I open this, it will represent the table, the contact table. I don't really know what was modified there. All I know is the latest state of my modification. So we go through the inheritance model, and the inheritance model allows us to only post our own work. So the custom, before we got into custom package, the contact table already existed in the system. Somebody worked on it, somebody put fields in it, or not fields, but the columns in it. But what we did is we changed the permission and allowed permission by records and by operation on that table. So that change was created in the package custom, and that package is those changes are stored in this contact object. So that's basically how it works. If I were to go and delete this line right now, just by clicking delete button, it would remove all the changes that I made on the contact. I don't want to do that because I'm going to need that. But keep in mind that everything we're going to be doing is going to be stored in our package. So let me go back into the system. And what I want to do is I want to change my current package back to custom. You don't need to do it. I'm going to change it back to custom just so that we're saving everything in the same place. I'm going to log out and log back in. All right. Now, that field or that old interface that you saw, that it had a couple of additional options that might be useful to us when we're configuring the system. On occasion, especially when we're learning, we might do something that this interface becomes unavailable to us. We, let's say, posted a code that doesn't compile, or we posted a code that yields errors or raises errors, and basically it breaks the system. So one of the ways to get into this interface by not by going through this menu and then clicking on the advanced settings, is to use what's called a shortcut. And the shortcut is going to be the same URL /0/dev. When you go this route, you will go straight into this configuration settings, and you will be able to delete your latest modifications or whatever you've uploaded, so you can at least get back into the system and get it working rather than being stuck somewhere. So it's just a shortcut. I'm probably going to be using it just because it's faster to type /0/dev than going through system design or advanced settings, etc., etc. What's important here is that you are not seeing those access permissions or audit logs right here. The only thing you're seeing is the configuration tab of that window. When you're here, most of the errors can be fixed by executing compile all items or compile modified items. What this basically does is recompiles the system with the new modifications. Now, the reason that something is not 100% compiled is because we somehow interrupted the process. Not sure how you interrupt the process, but it could have been connection, loss of connection, file not fully updated, whatever the case might be. Something prevented the system from correctly recompiling itself. So what we can do is we can try to compile all items. A lot of times that will fix all the problems that we're experiencing with the system. Okay, so enough of this, and let's start doing something with our system, and let's start writing something into it. So let's take the contact. So I'm going to go back into the general, and I'm going to go back into my contact. And now what I want to do is I want to start modifying something. Let's take this, oops, New Boston, whatever, it doesn't matter which one we take. So let's say we take this New Boston. And we see that we have a bunch of fields here, we have a bunch of fields here, some account information, etc., etc. We also have a progress bar that we can configure. What I want to do now is pretend that I have a contact section here, and inside this contact section, I want to add some information that is relevant to me in my particular installation. So one of such things could be maybe adding a new tab and providing some credit score information, maybe background check, maybe credit card information. If this is, for example, a B2C environment, let's just pretend that we're going to do that. The idea here is that we want to modify the existing page, the existing section, and add something of our own to fit our needs. And to do that, we need to go into what's called a view, open section wizard. Now, you would see that there is a section wizard here, and there is also a section wizard available to us from configuration. Where's that section? Section wizard in here. When we create section wizard, when we open section wizard from this point, we're opening a section wizard in new mode. So basically, we're going to be able to create our own sections, design our own pages, and implement all the functionalities there, basically go through the registration process. When we need to edit something, we can't go from here. We actually have to find the section that we want to add, it somewhere on the left-hand side, and then click on the view and open section wizard. Before we go into section wizard, I want to talk a little bit about the columns here. So this is called a grid view or a list view, depending who you ask. On the list view, you can configure fields that you're displaying. There are two fields, list view and tile view. In a tile view, you have unlimited access to the real estate, so you can have as many fields as you want, and it can go 24 columns wide and unlimited amount of rows deep. So you can go down as far as you want, and you can go only 24. 24 refers to those little, these little cells, and all the dimensions in the system are going to be basically row span and column span. The row span is unlimited, but the column span can be up to 24, so not more than 24. Here, you can simply go and add some values that are important to me. So for example, we added the business phone again, and it's going to be copied from here. It doesn't matter basically how many times we're showing stuff, it's going to be the same field. The idea here is that we get the data once, and how we represent it doesn't really matter. It's going to be bound to the same data source. Okay, now let's go to section wizard and let's go and add something of our own. So when we're opening section wizard, you can see that the section wizard is opening up, and then you get this pound sign, and then you get the ID. The ID will refer to the ID, the internal ID of this particular section. So it may be important for you from time to time, but for now, let's just ignore the ID that is here. It's going to be generated, and that represents the ID of the section. When we're opening the section, like I said, section consists of multiple files, and we've seen that when we went to the advanced settings. What we did though is we grouped everything by section. So this whole thing is called a section. It's got obviously the picture, it's got the title, the code. The code is what you see right here. So contact, that's the code. Um, then we have page settings, whether it's one page for all records or multi-page. I will show you how it works later. Approval in the section will this checkbox control whether or not this particular record can go for approval. That's going to be important for us when we use business processes. This is the only way where it's relevant. Then we've got business rules, cases, business processes. And those are the areas where we can connect our section with some additional elements available to us. Now, those navigation bars, like those chevrons pointing to the left and chevrons pointing to the right, they're just navigation ones. So there is nothing hidden behind. There is no other tab there. All it does, it just simply puts me in this on the page stuff. Now, when the first time we're opening the page, it will be a while because the system is loading a bunch of support code to represent the state of the page. But when it does, this is what it looks like. So it's quite similar to what you're seeing when you open the record in the normal mode, right? So you've got the picture, you've got the progress bar time, some full time, some information here, a bunch of tabs and a bunch of fields. It's exactly the same structure that you're seeing here, except the details are maybe hidden and you're not really seeing which columns are presented when you're editing the record, but the details are here and all the basically the structure, the whole thing is here. When I want to configure something of my own, I need to be using elements from the left, and there are elements related to the contact or just the page elements. Now the page elements, you've got widgets, charts, metric, gauges, and web pages. Web pages we're not going to touch at all, and these guys, they're basically like little dashboards related to specific record. So for example, you can use a metric dashboard to tell me the amount of outstanding invoices, and we can put it like a little dashboard. We will use this element in, when we build our own section called expense report. Contact section, or this basically second drop-down list or expandable list, that represents all the columns that are available to us on the contacts database. So if I were to go into the database, you would see that all these fields, they exist in the database as columns. And that's why they're called existing columns. Now the new columns are the ones that we can drag and drop onto the surface of the designer, and it will create a new column for us. So let's go ahead and click on the plus button. And what I want to do first is I want to create my own tab here. And inside that tab, I want to be putting my own elements so that it doesn't pollute basically the look of the existing the existing contact. So to do that, I'm going to click on the plus and I'm going to say demo, just demo. Good enough. Inside this demo, I want to create a couple of fields. Now, I can't really drag and drop fields onto here. I need to create a field group first. Field group first is internally how we allocate basically amount of canvas that is available to us. So I'll create a new field group and I'll say private info, or it's going to be some sort of a secret information. Okay, so now that I have my private information, I want to put some fields onto it. So for example, the first field that I want to do is I want to say that maybe social security number. Maybe that's important to me. If that's a contact of ours, we're going to be popping their account, we're taking money from them. Maybe I want to have their social security number. Let's assume that. So I'm going to be using a field that is of a type that can store that information. Now, I can certainly use an integer field to represent the social security number, but that's probably not a good one. So I probably want to use a string field. Now, the string can represent alphanumeric value of unlimited length, or it could be like limited to 50, 250, 500 characters, whatever the case might be. In our case, what I'm going to use is I'm going to use a string field and just simply drag and drop it onto the surface. And when I do, a new pop-up window shows up and starting to ask me questions. Title, name and database is required, and a bunch of other options. Before we move on, let me open something on my side here, and I'll show you what the table looks like. Okay, so I'm gonna go into my Visual Studio, not Visual Studio, the SQL Management Studio, and I'm gonna find a database that is this guy. So tables, that's going to show me the structure of my database, and you can see that there's a lot of tables, and the one that I'm looking is contact. I want just to quickly explore that with you just a little bit. So let's find city, contact. Where's my contact? There's my contact, columns, and this is a bunch of basically a bunch of columns that are available to me on the database. Now you could see that some of them have foreign key constraints, some of them primary numbers, etc., etc. But the idea here is that you can inspect all the values if you have a local installation. This is why it's preferred that you do any customizations, not in the production environment, but on your local host or some sort of a local environment where you do have access to the database, so you can control and inspect what's happening on the back end. Now, if we're going to look at this stuff, we're obviously not going to find any secret information or the private information or any of those fields. So what I want to do now is I want to go ahead and I'll keep that thing open, and I want to name this field. So let's call it social security number. And for social security number, we're going to give it a name. Now, in my case, name in DB is going to start with ACDM. ACDM is the default prefix that is used to name everything in the system. This setting is available in system settings, and it's called prefix, package prefix. So search for prefix. Maybe it's in the lookup, I apologize. Where's my lookup? Prefix, come on. No, maybe it is in system setting. Oh, I forgot prefix for object name. So prefix for object name is the one that in my case is ACDM. In your case, it's USR. Now it's important that the packages and everything we do in the system starts with something of our own. The reason being is, as you already seen, we can inherit from various packages. So let's imagine that somebody created an application on Bpm'online, and they want to use the same field name as you. So for example, social security number. So they created a field called SSN, and you wanted to use the same field, and the system would be confused. It wouldn't know how to interpret that, because you can have a repeating field, especially if it's a primary identifier. So what the solution is to prepend all the names with your custom package. When you're developing something for your own client or for yourself, it doesn't really matter what you use. You can use 3-character USR or name of your company or whatever you want it to use. When you are building an application for Marketplace, you have to kind of conform to already taken prefixes. So it's almost like a DNS model where domain names are taken and they're centrally managed. They're managed by our Marketplace guys, our department, and when you want to issue something for a Marketplace, you have to ask for a prefix to use so that it's not being repeated by anybody else. So just a bit of a word of caution when you start changing it. So in my case, it's ACDM. I'm not going to be changing it. In your case, it's going to be USR. It doesn't really matter what it is, as long as it's unique to your application. Now, the reason I'm using this ACDM and not the USR is on occasion what I do is I export this package and give it to participants after we finish the training so that they can take a look at how some of the stuff was configured if they can't um, replicate it on their own. Okay, so the package we haven't modified anything yet. We haven't saved, so we're sitting here in the um, field, basically designer, and we've given a title we've given the title to this object or to this new column, and the name in the database, let's call it ACDM SSN. We're going to save that. So that's going to represent our social security number. The next thing is, let's say we're going to be obtaining some sort of a credit score for this contact. So I will be using integer value, and the integer value is going to be representing, let's say, credit score between 0 to, well, depending on the country, let's say 700 credit score. Oops, credit score, and I'm gonna call it ACDM credit score. Okay, I'll save that. And then maybe what I want to do is I want to give you a date. So credit score and date. And then I'm going to do credit score date here. And then maybe a couple of other fields. If you can think of something, let me know. But otherwise, it's, oh, maybe a credit card. So let's use another one for credit card. Credit card. And let's call it credit card. Now, when I make a mistake here and I try to save something, the system is going to try to validate. And in this case, it's telling me that I can have a value with the spaces in it. And that's simply because this name will be used to name the column in the database. And not all databases support, the databases that we work don't support spaces in their name. So basically it has to follow certain formats. So symbol 0 to 9, they cannot be first, A to Z or Z has to be the name. So no special characters. All right, so that's going to be, let's say, the information that I wanted. Now I can put some other Boolean values. Let's say been bankrupt or was bankrupt. Bankrupt and is bankrupt. Is bankrupt. Maybe like this. Is the contact bankrupt or not? So, or in bankruptcy protection. So that's going to give me a Boolean value where I can say yes or no. All right, so let's save this. When I save my record, what's going to be happening is the system is going to go on the back end, and first it's going to update the structure of my database, and eventually, when it's done, we'll be able to refresh the tables, and we will see all the fields basically populating here. So we'll have to keep refreshing it until it's done. Refresh, maybe it's done already. No, nothing yet. So when it's done, we'll see that the new fields are added to the system. And when they're done, I wanted to show you what they are. In the meantime, we simply sit and wait. So their DB compilation, DB update was done. So we should be able to go and see them. Refresh, see the columns. And there are my fields. So ACDM, 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 ACDM. So what the system is doing, it modified the structure of the table that not me, but somebody else created. But it created all the fields with my prefix in it. And that's why prefix is quite important. So if somebody created just the SSN field, well, it's kind of a common name for it. So the system would be confused when we're writing to this field, who's writing to it, right? And that's why we're using prefixes. Now, also what's important here is that you could see that the values that are defined. So when we're creating something alphanumeric, so basically a string value from this new designer, then the default length is 250 characters long. We can modify it somewhere else, but not from here, not from this designer. I'll show you another place where you can modify it. Now the credit score, you can see that it's of a type integer and it's not null. The date is of a type date, and again, the string is 250 long, and this is our Boolean. This is our yes or no answer, and that's of a bit. So we'll see how it's all implemented when the system loads. and when the system finishes doing what it's doing. Just like creating those access permissions, and we took the system down, then recompiled, brought it back up, exactly the same thing is happening right now. The database is modified, and these new fields are being basically linked to all the libraries. So that's available for us for permission, for searches, for pretty much everything out of the box. So give it a moment. It will soon be done. Okay, changes applied successfully. When changes are applied, the only notification we're getting in this build or in this version of the system is just a notification. Previously, if you're using an older one, this page would actually close on its own, but now there is no need for it. So we can, what we can do now is we need to reload this page with clear cache. So in my case, it's going to be on Windows Chrome. It's going to be Control plus F5, and that will reload my page with clearing all the cache, basically pulling all the new JavaScript to represent the new model. And now let's open our contact information from anywhere, actually. And then let's go to Andrew Baker. There's my demo tab. So we lost a little bit of the order here. We can fix that up. And here's a bunch of fields that are available to me. So social security number, credit score, credit date. If I choose the date, the calendar shows up and I can choose the date. And credit card, I can put the number. Now, obviously, there's no validation of any kind. I can put any number I want, not necessarily a credit card. So let's now say that I want to build some validations into it. And that's going to be what we call business rules. The business rules are available to us on this section of the section wizard. Now let me close this thing. And before we go into business rules, let's review what happened here. We see that the contact page and the contact section files were added to our package. Now that's the custom package. You should see the same thing if you're doing this exercise. Now the contact section, that represents the section. So basically represents the whole thing, including some of the buttons, how the grids look, how these things are configured. So everything that we see on the section is represented in the section file, as well as the dependencies and other objects that we're linking. The page itself represents the structure of the page that we see once we open it for editing. If we double click on this stuff, on this file, we'll see the internal structure of it. Don't be alarmed, we're not going to be modifying it by hand. And when you take the dev class, you will understand the structure of this thing, and it's going to be fairly straightforward for you to work with. It's built in the JSON format, so all the fields will have its properties and its bindings defined here, and it's all in JavaScript format. So let it load up. Now, in the meantime, can each developer have their own prefix in the same system? Recommended that you as the developer have one prefix and you work on different files, or you're building a functionality and that's your prefix. So think of a prefix as identifier for all your work done on the platform, especially when you're building something for the marketplace. You will be assigned a prefix that you're going to be using for all your functionality. So each developer will have the same prefix that is assigned to you as the company. Okay, so here we have a bunch of stuff and might look a little bit cumbersome to work with, but it's really not all that difficult. We will go here and we might modify something, but what I want you to know now is that everything that we're doing is going to be stored here in a text format that we can always go back here and see what this is and modify the behavior or the representation of certain elements in code, and we don't necessarily need to go into the designer or the wizard. And in fact, when you're doing some advanced functionality and you're trying to develop stuff, then you're probably going to be going here quite a lot and developing it by hand. In the meantime, what we're doing here is we're using an element that inherits from other elements. And that's why I wanted to open this. So let's look at the contact page and let's review what this is. It's telling me that we are recording my all the changes in the package called custom. The name of this file is contact page v2. The name is contact page v2. And the most importantly, parent object is contact page v2. So what's contact page v2? Well, originally when the contact page was created, it was created as the basic element, and let's say it had only like 10 or 15 fields. I don't remember exactly how many was created. It doesn't matter. And then throughout the evolution of the product, we kept adding and adding and adding, and all those additions are done on separate files. So let's say the next in line in the dependency tree added 5 more fields, and then another 2 more fields, and another, and another, and another. And by the time we're done, we have this long list of all these dependencies. So what we're doing here is we're saying that we're inheriting from the last version of contact page v2. And the way we figure out what the last version is by locating our package somewhere in the list of dependencies. So the list of dependencies is going to be quite important to us when we're configuring the functionality or when we're developing some of our own functionality, which is why the custom package basically inherits from everything, so that all the modifications made in the system are visible to us in the custom package, so we can rely on it being available at all times. Okay, so it's note. For now, we don't need to use this JavaScript stuff, so let's close it. So that's basically what ended up happening. Let's go ahead and try to modify some of this information. So we're going to go back into our demo, social security number, let's say, okay, credit score, let's say I'm going to be 750 to qualify, credit card. Okay, so there's a credit card, and let's say the date that I obtained my score, let's say it was to date and is bankrupt. Let's say it's a no. Let's save this thing. Okay, great. So now all that information is saved, and it's not applied just to Andrew Baker. Obviously, it's available to every record. So in this case, this record doesn't have it filled in. It's all missing, so we need to go ahead and apply this. But the interesting part is that by allowing the system to go through its compilation, rebuilding processes, those values are important, are available to us on searches and access from external sources through API. So those columns that we added already implemented on API. So if you're using OData to talk to our system, then those columns and the information stored in them is already available. So let's prove that. Let's switch to our advanced mode, and let's say that I'm looking for contacts whose credit card, so social security number or credit card, and you could see that I don't refer to things here by their code like ACDM, SSN. I'm referring to it by the title that we given to the column when we designed it. So let's say social security number is basically is filled in. So let's apply that. And there's my Andrew Baker. So that functionality is immediately available to me. I can also now search for those fields as related or nested tables. So the whole thing is available to us right away. We didn't have to do much. Okay, so now what I want to do is now I want to do some validation. So let's say that I don't want to have any of this stuff available to me, or I want to make some of the stuff required when some information is filled in. So what could it be? Let's go to section wizard, and the way we can go to section wizard is by going to section cases or section wizard. It doesn't matter, it just opens a different tab in the section wizard. So let's go to section wizard. If we open section cases, you saw here cases tab, it would just basically put us on that tab in that wizard. So it takes us to the same place. Or the same section, I guess, in the system, just a slightly different place within that section. So if we open the cases, we would end up on this tab, but we really want to come on the page, or actually, in our case, we want to come on the business rules because we want to build some validation. So first, let me just go ahead and drag my demo on the front. so I don't have to look for it. And next, what I want to do is I want to say that I want to build some business rules. So for example, what kind of rules can I build? I can say that something is required based on the value of another field, or I can say that something is going to be filtered by some other value. So what that means is, imagine you have a state and a country, and by you choosing a country, you only see states or provinces available in that country. So that's the filtration option that is available, and we can implement it um, without any developer. Basically, we can implement it as analyzed by clicking a few things in the system. So let's create a new business rule. The business rules will have their name filled in automatically. You could see that you cannot edit this field. There is a little lock on the field. That means that I can't edit anything. I'm trying to edit really hard on my keyboard, and it's not letting me. Okay, so now the business rule itself, we have the condition for when to perform the rule, and then we have the outcome of the rule. So if something happens, do something that I defined here. So let's take a look at what we can do, and then we'll try to look at the conditions that are available to us to figure out when to do that. When you click on the plus, you'll see a drop-down list of 4 possible options. So show field on the page, make field required, make field editable, and add field values filter. This field, this last option, is the only one that does not need any if condition. That's simply because those filtration options apply all the time. They're not only temporary applications. So for example, it doesn't matter what the other values are. You can't apply filter only sometime, right? So you either apply filter or you don't apply filter. It's not conditional. Let's cancel out of here. Let's create new business rule and show field on the page, for example. Let's say that we want to say a rule. If my credit score is filled in, then I want to show the date for when it was obtained. Okay, so that sounds like show field on the page type of rule. And now I want to create my conditions. So here I will say if something is filled in, then show something here. Now show field on the page. If I click on the plus button, I can't do it right now. So I need to give it a field name to which the outcome will apply. So I know the field name. It's going to be ACDM. Oops. Yeah, there is no magnifying glass, unfortunately, in this build. It disappeared. It will be, I believe, it will be enabled back in the next version. So for now, just you're going to have to suffer a little bit, and you're going to have to write it by hand. So the field that we want to modify is this guy. So we want to modify the demo field, and we're saying, so if the credit score is available, then the credit score date is going to be visible or required to us. So we named it ACDM, credit score date. I believe that's the field name. And then we want to apply it when, and here the drop-down box is available to us. So let's say credit score itself is filled in, or it basically has value. So let's apply this rule. Now, when you save the rule, credit score date, so that tells you which column this business rule applies to, and it says show field on the page. So we know that there are some conditions when we're showing the field on the page, otherwise field should be invisible. Let's save this page. Now this saving shouldn't take too long. It should be much faster because we don't need to go through a database update. And let's see how this works, and then we can go ahead and configure some of the other rules. Okay, so change successfully, great. Now, before I can see the results, I need to, again, clear cache and reload the page. So Control F5, you're going to be doing a lot of it if you're developing anything. And you could see that the demo tab is now properly ordered. So it goes in the order that I've selected that by manually dragging. And now let's say that I want to remove my credit score, and this field becomes invisible. So when I'm creating a new record, this is what it would look like, right? So this is what the record would look like. Just get rid of all this stuff. Let me save this. And when I go back into my, oops, I go back into any records. Um, oh yeah, the credit score is 0. Um, hmm, Made a little bit of a little mistake. So recently, what has happened is we've added support for Oracle database. And Oracle apparently does not have nulls for integers. So every time we initialize integer, it becomes a 0 by itself. So there is no null for integer. That's why our rule doesn't work. So what we need to do is we need to modify our rules, basically say that the credit score not equal to 0, then this field is hidden. But otherwise, it's working fine. You could see when there is no value in it, JavaScript picks it up and says, okay, well, that field is gone. So let's go and fix that little mistake. Let's open Section Wizard. And you can open Section Wizard, or you can come back to the one that you had previously opened. It doesn't really matter as long as you're working in one and you're only saving changes in one. Otherwise, the system will get confused where the changes are coming from. And this is one of the areas that might break your page. So there will be some partial configurations saved in your package. So let's go into business rules. And inside this rules, what I want to do is I want to open the one that we've configured, and I want to say instead of is filled in, is not equal to, and let's give it an integer value of 0. So when it's not 0, then great, then apply this rule. The next rule that I want to do is maybe if I have a social security number, I want to make the other field required. So let's say that if column, and let's see the column SSN is filled in. So the strings are fine with filled in key. So if filled in, then make field required on the page. And the field that I want to make required is going to be credit card. So let's say ACGM credit card. Let's apply this rule and let's save this. Okay, so change is applied successfully. Let's reload this page. Okay, so now things work better with the credit score. So let's say I'm going to put a credit score of 750, and the date is going to be, I'll be able to choose the date. And then let's say that I put social security number. And when I do, you could see that the credit card becomes marked with the red asterisk. So that means that if I'm trying to save something, the system is going to ask me for the credit card information, and I cannot save my stuff without filling in something. Now, it's not a full validation, so the user can still use some gibberish to type in this field and it will save it. And to use the validation, we would need to use some classes and some libraries. So basically, we would need um, to do a little bit of a development to validate some of the credit card. It's not difficult, but it's not something that I will be covering in this module. For now, all we need to know is that we can make those rules visible. Now, the last rule that I want to show you is how we can make something editable on the page. And so, for example, let's add a business rule, and let's say that I want to make field editable. So if, for example, is bankrupt equals to Boolean value checked. So it's very easy. We don't have to worry about representation in the database. So if the Boolean value is checked, then make something editable. Otherwise, let's say it's locked up. Now, what could possibly be editable? I think we forgot I forgot the date. I forgot to add the date for when somebody went bankrupt, like notes or something. Um, so let's see if we can use notes, for example, field. We'll make this note, so something we have not touched, but we'll try to make it editable. Otherwise, it's not editable. Okay, so let's go here and say that notes going to be make field editable. So let's apply that and let's save this thing. Now it's important to know what kind of stuff is recorded in the context, like what the objects are called. You can always double click on the object itself and see the representation of the columns. This view is available to you when you're working with the cloud version. You don't need to have access to the local database. And so when you look at the columns, you can inspect pretty much all the tables. Now, in your case, what you will see is that there are inherited columns, and sometimes you want to see those system columns, system values basically, and those are created by, modified on. So what we would need to do is click on settings, and inside the settings, make sure that we show system columns and show entire list of column types. This will come handy when we're trying to add something later. This will reload the structure of the column, and it will show us owner, created by, created on, modified by, and those 5 fields are going to be quite important for us when we're trying to do something else, and I'll explain that a little bit later. In the meantime, let's find our column. We said that we're going to be using some sort of notes, and notes are right here. That's the field that we made editable or not, and there it's title. So when in doubt, you can always come back here and take a look at the field name, and that's why my rule should have saved. Had I used some incorrect rule, it wouldn't save. So let's refresh our page and see how this works. So let's say that we currently in the attachments and notes, we can clearly modify things. Let it load up. No, we can't modify things. I can't go into anything. You could see that my whole thing is like I'm trying really hard to double click into it, and basically this field is enabled, but it's view only. I can't save anything. So oops, where am I? So what I need to do is I need to go back into my bankrupt tab, and now I can type it quite easily. Date, and then give it something June 1st, 2017, for example. I can save this record. Now, what's going to happen though is by me checking or unchecking is bankrupt and saving this record, that does not delete anything from here. It just makes it read only, so it's uneditable. So you can already envision how you can use it. So for example, you have somebody in credit and collections department who has access by columns to some stuff on their own tab, and they say, I want to update these records. And when they set some property in your own defined fields, then some other values become unusable for other users in the system. So similarly, you can say is available for sale. So you prevent people from going and selling something. Now you may need to be to do some simple code modifications to make sure that it's not showing up where you don't want, but we can easily filter that and not show customers for whom, let's say, is bankrupt set to true. Now, so far, we've covered basic business rules, and the filtration is the last one that I need to show you. We will use that when we build our own custom stuff. For now, it's we can see how it's going to work when we work with the addresses by choosing the provinces and the countries, but we'll do something of our own later. Now, from what I've covered so far, do you have any questions how business rules work and what you may use them for? Okay. No, no questions so far. So I assume everything is clear then. So let's close this, this stuff. And what I want to do now is I want to go through a quick setup of a of printable form, just so we know how it works. So tomorrow when we're actually designing one, you're going to be a little bit more prepared, and all the minimum requirements are complied with. In order for you to set up a printable form, I'll close all this stuff. In order for you to create your own printable form, we first need to install a Microsoft Word plugin. Just close stuff that I don't need on the other screen. Okay, so what's a Word printable plugin? What we can do is we can put a little print button here and a little print button here, just like you see here. And when you click on the print option, something will generate a downloadable file that once we click, it shows us some information. Now, currently, it's the information of the particular contact. It's just a basic representation of the contact card. But what if we wanted to do our own? How would we go about it? Well, the easiest thing to do that is to go on the cogwheel, find the lookup section of the system. So let's look for lookups. And inside the lookups, we're going to be looking for what's called printable. So let's look for printables. Now, you can partially type the name of the lookup if you know what it is, or you can scroll through all these groups. But printable is basically the easiest way is just to type in print, and it will open up printable. Now, there's two types of printables. The first type is nice and easy, and that's use the Microsoft Word. Microsoft Word template. The other one is a little bit more difficult, and that's using what's called DevExpress. And these are two different types, so Microsoft Word or DevExpress. DevExpress is not something that we'll be covering here. You would need to know the entire entity model and how to use connection strings and all that great stuff to build your own data retrieval. But Microsoft Word is fairly straightforward, very easy to use, gives us basic functionality, and a week from now it's going to get a major update. So just watch out for a new version. Okay, so when we're going to create a new Microsoft Word, another pop-up is going to come up, and we're going to configure elements we're going to configure section and the elements in the section that we want to put printable form on. So the first, let's give it a name. So the name is going to be my contact info, or let's say AR contact info. And then the section that we want to put in is going to define where that print button is going to show up. So we saw it already on the contact section, but that's okay. You can have more than one printable form. The idea here is when you're putting a section, it's going to pass the ID of the record on which you press that button. So if I say that I want to put it in the section contact, the ID of the record on which I press this print button is going to be passed into this printable form. So the system will be able to figure out which records to pull out of the database, put it on the paper, and allow you for download. So let's say that it's going to be a contact. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say show in section, show in card, and convert to PDF. Now show in section will give me this print button. Show in card will give me this print button. And convert to PDF will just simply provide me with the PDF file rather than with the Microsoft Word, with the Microsoft Word download. If you download Word, that's probably going to be good for generating some sort of contracts or generating some sort of a quote from the sales section, from the opportunities, things like that, things that you need to modify after they download it from the system, whereas the PDF probably better suited for something that you don't want people to modify once the file is created. Okay, so now that we figured what those checkboxes are, let's go ahead and create a list of fields that we want to see on the face of the paper. To do that, we're going to click on the setup list of fields. If you're following the example, make sure that the pop-ups are enabled because all these things, they generate pop-ups and you need to enable it in your Chrome or whatever the browser you're using. Okay, so in the column setup, we immediately get this contact section. And from the contact section, we can see a list of all the fields that we can grab. So do not use fax, true or false, do not use email, all that great stuff we can right away see. But we're interested in our stuff, something that we just added. So what we need to do is look for social security number. There's my social security number. Uh, I'll just click to the right, and there it's going to be available here. Now I want to get my credit. So credit card, credit score, and credit score date. I'll select all three of them. I can still do that. And I'll click on the right. And that's going to put it on the list of available fields for me. Let's maybe give it a full name. Let's search for name. Name. There's my full name. There it is. And let's see what else we want. City. Maybe notes. Okay, so that sounds like a lot of information. Okay, great. Now, the other thing that we can do here is we can link related tables. Now, what could be a related table? For example, you can list, imagine that you're doing something for products in the opportunity. So you can say, I want to see information about the opportunity and the products in this opportunity. So when I'm generating my printable form, I will be able to see all the products that I once quoted or that I'm quoting right now. So that allows you to create one-to-many relationship and put it in the paper. In our case, we haven't really created anything with one-to-many relationships, so let's just skip that for now, and let's just make sure that you have all the minimum requirements for you to create that later on. We're going to be using one-to-many relationship, obviously, when we're creating our expense report. But for now, all I wanted to do is just to create a basic printable form, just like that. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and click OK. And now, if I refresh my view, I'll see that I have company summary and contact summary, and that's somebody that we've built as the default printable form for your contact card, and then you've got your AR contact information. Now, if I am trying to run this AR contact information, I'm not going to get anything. I'm going to get an error. Actually, I'm going to get nothing because there's no template to use. There's no design. We haven't really told the system how to put those fields on the paper. So we still need to go ahead and design the actual feel and look of our report. What we've done so far is we simply created a object representing the data that we're going to be getting the information from, but we haven't really designed anything to put it on paper just yet. So in order to do that, we need to use Microsoft Word software. And let me load this. Okay, and we're going to get a blank document. And when you open it, you should have Bpm'online plugin. And that's the one that will allow me to connect to the system, download some stuff, modify it, and upload back. Let me show you where you can get it. If you're going to go on the Academy, bpmonline.com, and that's the place where you can go to get most of the information. The only difference between how you see it and how I see it is you're not going to get this black bar. That's just something for me to go ahead and modify things here. So what you can search is MS Word plugin. Click on the search, and the first link that's going to pop up is the one that you want. So the MS Word printable setup, and you go on this article, and this article will have a link installing BPM plugin. When you go down here, you will see two links for download. So here's link number 1 for 32-bit Word, and here's the link number 2 for 64-bit Word. Now it's important that you install it for the right thing. My computer, for example, is 64-bit OS, but my Word, I believe, is just 32. I think it's in options. Hold on, I keep forgetting where you get it. I think it's something about account. Account. Okay, account. So under account in Word 2016, depending on which one you're using, about Word, and about Word, mine says that I am 32-bit system. So there it is, 32-bit system. So make sure that you install the plugin that is compatible with your version or your variant of Word, not the OS. I made that mistake and obviously it didn't work. Okay, so now that we know that, the next thing we're going to do is you're going to go ahead and download this file. This file is not too heavy. It's only, what, 75 megabytes, so it will download fairly quickly. And inside that file, you'll see a couple of things that we need to install prior to installing um, our actual plugin. And those things are listed here. If you read the instructions, it will tell you that you need to make sure that you install Microsoft Word, launch this, and then install dependencies in this order. So primary interop assemblies, WCF data services, Visual Studio Tools for Office, and only then you're installing the plugin. So let me open my archive, my zip file, open up. Um, okay, so there it is, opened up. Let's go inside, packages, and there are the files that we need to download. So let's see how, so primary interop is this guy. WCF data services, it's going to be this file. Visual Studio Tools. Visual Studio Tools is this guy, and then the plugin itself is here. If you need to install .NET, it's also available for you to install Quick Installer. Now, mind you that this guy will pull a lot of data if you don't have .NET installed. It's a couple of gigs, it's quite heavy. Okay, once you install this and you restart your Microsoft Word, you will get this plugin, Bpm'online. And this plugin will allow you to connect to your instance of Bpm'online. To do that, you're going to click on the connect. You're going to choose, let's say, supervisor. Supervisor is your username and password. And in my case, I already have localhost configured, but let's go on the plus button and make sure that it's configured to the right place, and it's not. So I'm going to go delete this. I'm going to go delete this. And this is what you would see on your end. So I'm going to click and create something new connection. I'm going to call it localhost, and I'm going to pass it this guy. That's my connection string. Now, in your case, it's going to be HTTPS, some number .bpmonline.com. In my case, I'm passing the entire connection string, including the port. Okay, so now that this is done, my local host, and to make sure that everything is working, if you can click on this drop-down box and it says default, then you're good. All configurations right now are stored in your default. It was once used that you could have multiple configurations. Now everything is in default, so it's architectural change, but it hasn't been addressed yet on the Word template. Okay, so now that we've connected to the system, the next thing I want to do is I want to select that printable to design. There's a button for it, so select printable. The system is now connecting to instance of my Bpm'online through web services and downloading a list of printable reports that I can configure with Microsoft Word. Okay, so there's my AR contact info, and it's the only one that's available for me to edit. The other one is done in DevExpress, and Microsoft Word is not going to try to edit something that it doesn't know how. So it's only going to show you a list of reports that you can edit with Microsoft Word. So AR contact info is the only one. Once we click OK, it might complain that the file already exists, and it's really a temporary file that already exists. So just ignore this error, click Yes, and wait. On the right-hand side, you're going to get a list of objects that are available for us to query. So unlike other reports, you can't just run it from Word. There is no F5 run button to kind of preview the data. So what we can do here is we can only throw it on the page, save it, upload it back, and then use that to generate a normal printable report. So let's go ahead and do that. So we say we had full name. So let's say that it's full name, or customer full name. Okay, and it's going to be first line. Second line is going to be social security number, or SSN, whichever way you want to do it. So I'll just drop this field. Um, so credit card, uh, credit score, and score date. Let's say that this is going to be our report that we want to configure. Okay, so the important thing here is that whatever the formatting you do on Microsoft Word, it's going to be respected once the final version of it is built. What I mean by that is these fields are nothing more than the macros that our system knows how to substitute with the real data. So whatever the template we're designing here in Microsoft Word, internally what's going to happen is upon clicking this print button, the system is going to open this file. It's going to look for macroses with these matching names and figure out what the value needs to be substituted in the name of this macros. So let's say that I want to do customer full name and I want to make it bold, or maybe even a little bit larger. Social security number, let's say I wanted to make it italicized and maybe underline. Credit score, I want to make it red. Credit score date, I don't know, maybe I want to do it blue, and the other one guy I'm not going to touch. Okay, so this is my wonderful formatting. As you can see, I'm not a very artistic person. And now what I can do is I can save in Bpm'online. To save it, I can just click on the save button. This will save a local copy. So let me file, save as, and save it on my desktop, just to kind of show you AR contact info is going to go on my desktop. Okay, so let me save that. But what I want to do really is I want to save it in Bpm'online. When I save it in Bpm'online, this will automatically upload this stuff to the cloud version or to the local version, whichever one you happen to be using. And once you save that, it will become available for you to print. Now, in my case, something happened with my system, and I haven't had a chance to fix it yet. So this upload functionality stopped working. I'm not sure why, but I wasn't able to figure that out yet. So what I am going to do is I'm going to go into my printables, and I am going to take this AR contact, and I'm going to upload this template that I've created by hand. When I click on the edit button, there will be an option for me to upload template. There is an upload template. So for most of you, you can just simply use Microsoft Word to save it into Bpm'online. In my case, I have to upload this template. Oops. Desktop and AR contact info. Open. Okay. So now, okay, it uploads it. Done. And now when I click on my AR contact info, what I expect is I expect a downloadable file with my PDF. And there it is, AR contact PDF, and let's see how it looks. Okay, so there's my Andrew Baker as the full name, social security number 555, credit score, date, and the credit card gibberish. So this is how you would design your own printable form. It's very, very easy to do. Tomorrow I'll show you how we can add related tables to it. So we can have maybe some stuff defining an expense report on the top, and then the detail will actually tell us the lines or specific expenditures that are reported on the particular document. Now, if you add some header, footer, design the background, all that great stuff, obviously it's going to be all respected, so no worries there. All you have to do, all you have to remember is that if you need to edit the records, you need to edit with the functionality of Microsoft Word. So if you know how to edit, for example, dates, and you want to represent them in a different format, then you need to use Microsoft Word to do that. If you want to, let's say, change the color of the credit score based on its value. So for example, for 700 and up, it's green. For 600 to 700, maybe it's red. Then you need to use Word functionality to do that. You can use macros to do all that great stuff, but that's really a functionality of Microsoft Word. It has nothing to do with us. So if you know how to do that, great, use it. Otherwise, this is the only thing that we can do. But it's enough for basic simple reports. Okay, so far, let's quickly recap what we've done. Today we looked at um, the security model. We looked at the permissions that we can assign by using those advanced settings. We looked at creating a very simple printable forms. We looked at the section wizard and business rules, how we can um, validate or do some basic validation based on some values that are showing up on the page. And we are probably, for now, have all the required or minimum requirements to start building our own sections, our own section tomorrow, so that we can implement some working prototype of our business expense report. And then tomorrow we're going to start by creating our workplace, designing our own section, allowing it to be used by certain people. And then the last day we're going to be using business processes to control the logic in this business report. So maybe we need to send notifications, send it for approval, etc., etc. So if you don't have any questions for today, I think that's all the time I have for today. So we will conclude the session. Otherwise, I can stay back and try to help you with whatever questions you have. Now, in the meantime, I forgot to mention that all sessions are being recorded, and the recordings are going to be available within, well, an hour, maybe 2 hours from the time I stop, and that has to do with the cloud functionality of the Zoom meeting provider. So as soon as that file is available to me, I will download it and upload it to YouTube. I will send you all the email. All recordings are going to be posted in one playlist to which you'll have access, so you can view it as many times as you want. And it's going to be available pretty much within maybe an hour or two. So if you don't have any further questions, feel free to disconnect. Tomorrow I will see you same place, same time, so 10 o'clock Eastern time. We will start sharp. You can use the same link that you used today to join. You will not be required to register anymore. It's already done. So that's it. Thank you very much.